He wakes before the world does. The apartment is quiet in a way that feels almost personal, as if silence itself has chosen him. No footsteps in the hall. No voice in the kitchen. No message waiting on the phone that changes anything. Just the pale light of morning slipping through half-closed blinds, falling across an unmade bed, a cold coffee mug, and the heavy stillness of a man who has spent too many nights pretending he is fine. This is where many men begin to disappear. Not in a dramatic collapse, but slowly, quietly. A missed call here, a cancelled plan there. The slow retreat from friends, from family, from the mirror. The world keeps moving, but he feels left behind, like life made a decision without consulting him. And because men are taught to endure without complaint, he tells himself it's nothing. He tells himself he's just tired, just busy, just in a rough season. But the body knows the truth before the mind admits it. Psychology has shown that loneliness is not a soft emotional inconvenience. Prolonged isolation activates the same regions of the brain linked to physical pain. In other words, the lonely man is not imagining his suffering. He is carrying it. Every unanswered text, every empty evening, every silent dinner becomes a signal to the nervous system. Something is missing, something is wrong, something must change. And that is where the danger begins. Because a weak man will interpret that pain as proof that he is broken. He will chase distraction, numb himself, beg for attention, or sink into resentment. He will confuse solitude with failure and silence with rejection. But a stronger truth waits underneath all of that. Loneliness is not always the end of a man. Sometimes it is the forge. Every hero's journey begins in an ordinary world that no longer fits. The old life becomes too small, too empty, too expensive to keep living. And the question arrives with uncomfortable force. Will this man be destroyed by the isolation, or will he use it to become someone harder, wiser, and more complete? If you've ever felt that quiet weight, if you've ever looked around your life and wondered how it became so empty, stay with me. Because what feels like the end may be the threshold to something far greater. At first, loneliness feels like a verdict. The apartment is quiet, the phone stays dark, and every hour seems to echo with the same cruel message. No one is coming. For many men, that silence becomes dangerous because they misread it. They think the emptiness around them means they are empty inside. But the truth is far more severe and far more useful. Isolation does not only hurt the heart, it changes the mind. It makes the days heavier, the body slower, and the spirit more vulnerable to fear, resentment, and distraction. This is why so many men break when life gets quiet. Without noise, without validation, without constant contact, they are forced to confront the one thing they have spent years avoiding: themselves. And that confrontation is painful. A weak man panics there. He reaches for cheap comfort, endless scrolling, meaningless conversations, anything that will numb the ache. But numbness is not healing. It is postponement. The pain remains, only deeper now, waiting in the shadows. Yet this same silence can become a forge. A wiser man begins to notice something different. He sees that solitude, when faced with discipline, can sharpen rather than weaken him. He wakes up earlier. He makes his bed. He trains even when no one is watching. He reads not for entertainment, but for direction. He sits with his thoughts long enough to hear what his life has been trying to say. In that stillness, he discovers that being alone is not the same as being abandoned. Sometimes it is the first real chance a man has to rebuild himself without applause. And that changes everything. Because when a man stops begging the world to fill his emptiness, he starts filling it with purpose. The gym becomes a temple. The kitchen becomes a place of control. The desk becomes a battlefield for focus. Even a simple walk at sunset can become a conversation with his future self. Slowly, he learns that solitude is not his punishment. It is his training ground. If you've ever felt the weight of being unseen, ask yourself this. What if that silence is not trying to destroy you, but to reveal you? What if the loneliness you fear is the very thing that can make you dangerous in the best possible way? And once a man begins to see that, he is no longer wandering. He is crossing the threshold. At first, loneliness feels like punishment. The room is quiet, the phone stays silent, and every hour seems to remind a man of what he does not have. But that is the first lie loneliness tells. It says, you are abandoned. It says, you are behind. And if a man believes that long enough, he begins to shrink inside his own life. He eats without tasting. He sleeps without rest. He scrolls through other people's lives while his own slowly drains of meaning. Yet silence is not always a sentence. Sometimes it is a mirror. And in that mirror, a man can finally see what noise has hidden for years. This is where the turning point begins. Not with rescue, not with a text message, a call, or someone coming to save him. It begins when he stops running from the ache and starts asking a harder question. What is this trying to teach me? That question changes everything. Because once a man stops seeing loneliness as proof of failure, he can start using it as raw material. The same empty apartment that once felt like a prison becomes a place of training. The same long evening that once invited self-pity becomes time for discipline. The same pain that once made him weak becomes the pressure that sharpens him. A wise man does not waste solitude. He uses it. He rises early even when no one is watching. He cleans the room. He trains the body. He reads words that challenge him instead of entertaining him. He sits with his thoughts long enough to see which ones are true and which ones are just fear wearing a familiar face. And slowly something changes. His posture improves. His voice steadies. His mind becomes less desperate for approval. He stops chasing people who only feed on his emptiness. That is the secret many men never learn. A lonely life is not automatically a wasted life. It becomes wasted only when a man refuses to grow inside it. But when he accepts the silence, he gains something most people never develop: self-command. He becomes harder to manipulate, harder to break, and far less dependent on the reactions of others. If this is speaking to you, take a second to like the video, not for the algorithm, but as a quiet sign that you understand the weight of this truth. Because the next step is where the real transformation begins. Learning how to turn inner solitude into outer strength, so that when the world sees him again, it will no longer see a man trying to be chosen, but a man who has chosen himself. At first, loneliness feels like punishment. A man sits in the same chair every night, staring at the glow of a phone that never lights up the way he hopes it will. The room is quiet, but inside his mind there is noise. Regret, comparison, shame. He tells himself he is being left behind, that his best years have already passed, that a man without company must be missing something fundamental. And that is where many men begin to break, because they interpret silence as proof that they are worthless. But silence is not the enemy. Panic is. There comes a moment when a stronger question appears. What if this empty space is not a sentence, but a workshop? What if the loneliness that once felt like a wound can become the place where discipline is born? This is the turning point. The man who once searched desperately for distraction begins to understand that every hour alone can either feed weakness or build character. One path leads to escape. The other leads to mastery. So he starts small. He makes his bed before touching his phone. He walks without headphones and listens to the sound of his own footsteps. He lifts weights when no one is watching, not for applause, but for proof that he can still command his body. He reads the pages he used to postpone. He writes down the thoughts he used to drown in noise. And slowly something changes. The apartment is still the same. The messages may still be few. But the man is no longer collapsing under the room. He is shaping himself inside it. A wise man once said that solitude reveals what company conceals. In that quiet, the weak habits become impossible to ignore. The need for approval becomes visible. The habit of escaping discomfort becomes obvious. And once a man sees these things clearly, he can no longer pretend they are not there. This is painful, yes. But pain can be a teacher when a man stops arguing with it. If you've ever felt that strange emptiness and wondered whether it means something is wrong with you, maybe the deeper truth is that something in you is waiting to be built. And if that idea speaks to you, take a moment to like this video, not for the algorithm, but as a sign that you understand the lesson. Because the real journey is not becoming less alone. It is becoming the kind of man who can stand alone without falling apart. And once he learns that, the next challenge begins. Not how to survive solitude, but how to turn it into power. At first, solitude feels like a sentence. The room is still, the phone stays silent, and every hour seems to remind him of what is missing. But the man who stays there long enough begins to notice something rare. The noise outside was never truly fixing him. It was only distracting him. And when the distractions fall away, he finally sees the raw material of his life sitting in front of him, untouched, waiting to be shaped. This is where the transformation begins. Not with applause, not with rescue, with responsibility. He starts waking up before the world demands his attention. He makes his bed, not because the bed matters, but because order matters. He trains when no one is watching, pushing his body through resistance until weakness has less room to speak. He reads when his mind wants comfort. He sits in silence long enough to hear the thoughts he used to drown out. And slowly, the pain that once felt meaningless becomes instruction. A weak man uses loneliness to justify decay. He tells himself nobody cares, so why should he care? But a stronger man asks a different question. What if this season is preparing me for something greater? What if the empty apartment is not a prison, but a workshop? In that shift, everything changes. The same hours that once fed his anxiety begin building patience. The same silence that once exposed his insecurity begins revealing his character. He stops waiting to be chosen and starts choosing himself. There is a quiet dignity in that. A man who can sit alone without collapsing is no longer owned by the opinions of others. He speaks more carefully. He moves with less desperation. He no longer chases every invitation just to avoid his own company. He becomes harder to manipulate, harder to shame, and impossible to ignore. Not because he became louder, but because he became centered. And maybe that is why so many people fear solitude. It reveals the truth. It shows a man exactly who he is when no one is clapping. But if he has the courage to stay, to listen, to rebuild, then loneliness becomes the forge where discipline is born. If this truth is landing in you right now, you already know what kind of man you are becoming. And if you want to walk that path with a clear mind and a stronger spirit, stay close, because the final step is where the man returns to the world with something far more powerful than attention. And that is where the real transformation begins. Not in applause, not in rescue, not in someone finally calling your name. It begins when a man stops running from the silence and starts listening to what it is trying to teach him. Because loneliness, left unattended, can hollow a man out. But solitude, chosen with purpose, can rebuild him from the inside. There comes a moment when the same apartment that once felt like a prison becomes a workshop. The same quiet that once sounded like rejection becomes the background of discipline. He wakes up earlier. He makes the bed. He trains when no one is watching. He reads when the room is still dark. He stops asking, "Why am I alone?" and begins asking, "What kind of man am I becoming in this season?" That single question changes everything. A weak man treats isolation like an insult. A strong man treats it like a forge. He understands that character is not built in the crowd, but in the private hours when nobody is clapping. He learns to sit with his own thoughts without drowning in them. He learns to hear his own voice again, clear and steady, underneath all the noise of the world. And slowly, the man who once felt invisible starts to carry himself like someone with weight, direction, and value. This is the quiet victory most men never claim. Not the victory of being chosen by others, but the victory of choosing yourself first. When a man becomes comfortable in his own company, he stops begging for connection and starts attracting it. His posture changes. His eyes change. His energy changes. People can feel the difference. There is no longer desperation in him, only presence. So if you have walked through that dark hallway of loneliness, do not shame yourself for it. Use it. Build in it. Let it strip away the need to impress, to chase, to perform. Let it teach you patience, strength, and self-respect. The man who can stand alone without collapsing is the man who can stand among others without losing himself. And maybe that is the deepest truth of all. Loneliness was never meant to end you. It was meant to reveal you. If this message gave you something real tonight, leave a quiet like, and tell me in the comments. Are you still surviving loneliness? Or have you started turning it into strength? And if you want more wisdom like this, subscribe because the journey is only beginning.